Mike, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here. This has been a long time coming, right?
It's been a long time coming. I have so many questions to ask you, but I don't think I can ask you any of those questions without
Why?
you giving some background
Oh, okay. Well, go
as to
ahead
your
then.
story, as to who you are. Why do people know who you are?
So they know who I am because in 1992, uh, as a result of an ongoing investigation in Suffolk County, which involved, at that time, an ex-partner of mine, I was caught up in a drug racketeering operation as a New York City police officer, and due to the nature of the allegations and the eventual convictions and crimes involved, which were extensive as far as the drug operations and some minor, I would say minor violence, but certainly intimidation more than as well, and then the corruption related, and then the outgrowth of the corruption from my case that racked the city back in the 90s, which was a direct result of, let's call it, the crack era. I became the poster boy for New York City's police department being corrupt and then cleaning it out.
So how did it all start?
Okay, so start. So of course I became a police officer, and then at some point in 1982, at some point during my career, we all make choices, and I fell into a position where I saw an opportunity to enrich myself financially, opposed to doing the right thing. And there's hundreds of reasons why you begin to lose your way, let's just say, and why you begin to be disillusioned. And then greed can slip in quite easily then, and it did in my case. And rather than going to work to be a police officer, which I actually loved being a police officer, it was actually a very exciting, fun, rewarding job in many ways. But part of what took place in the 80s was that the police became sort of an encampment enemy where the streets were taken over by crack dealers. The bureaucracy of the police department was not in cohesion with the enforcement because it was so expensive. And the police officers became the guardians of the drug business because they were encouraged not to make arrests. So, being an entrepreneurial spirit, I saw it many different ways, and I'd like to blame one thing or the other, but I have to blame myself. At some point, one of my partners brought home this thing that was in a plastic vial. We didn't know what it was. He brought it home. He found out that it was cocaine, and he came back and handed me a couple $100, and that was for one little stash on a street corner that we had been throwing it away. And so my partner at the time, who was slightly older than me but had the same street experience as myself, he knew a little bit more about the drug world than I actually did, to be honest with you. He showed me that they could make money here, and we began to seek opportunities to make money rather than make arrests, because making the arrests put us on the radar for overtime abuse, which, if you know anything about budgets in cities, and those are things that are important to them, is money and expenses. And when the police officers are locking people up for 10, 20, 30 vials of crack, which was an insignificant, quote unquote, effect, because it was so rampant, that they began to come down on the cops for making the arrests. So it was one of those justifiable reasons, quote unquote, where a cop would say, you know what, I might as well get paid by taxing these people because they don't want me to arrest them. If I arrest them, I get in trouble with my bosses. So rather than arrest them, I'll just tax them. Either I take their drugs or take their money, in some cases both. So that was the beginning of what would become to be known as the 7-5 Precinct, which became a documentary, and that's how it started. So how it begins with a whittling away of your own personal morality.
How much that was an outgrowth, and you kind of mentioned it, of the environment that the city was in at the time?
Right. So yeah. So to be more specific, So when I became a police officer, it was just cocaine. Okay, cocaine was a problem, but it was really the highfalutins that had a cocaine thing, right? I mean, back in the late '70s, early '80s, the highfalutins, the Studio 54 crowd, the Hamptons crowd, the Wall Streeters, they all liked their cocaine, and that was okay because there was really no violence associated with it. But once they switched over to crack, and I'm going to tell you, when I first saw crack, I would I would I would say it was 85 into 86. It's when I first saw crack cocaine. Now, it might have been out in 83 or 84, but when I first came across it, uh, it just it ripped through an already so there are different neighborhoods in every city, and when you're in the quote unquote ghetto, it ripped through the ghetto. It took anybody who had a soul no longer had a soul. So we dealt with soulless people at that point because crack was their god. And prior to that, it was that what's that, angel dust, right? There was angel dust in the late '70s, early '80s, and then angel dust, which was really a weird type of drug. It made people crazy and violent. But crack cocaine, it just consumed everything they did because they just kept chasing the next piece of crack. And so where I worked in the East New York neighborhood, called the underprivileged, whatever call, because it's privilege there's privilege in there too. Don't everyone thinks it's the ghetto. Yeah, well, you heard stories and stuff. Sometimes the ghetto is the richest place in the world because there's a lot of cash coming to those neighborhoods. But the reality was the crack controlled the street, and if I didn't go to 2 to 3 shootings a day, I'd be telling you I didn't go to work that day. That's why. And it was an ongoing thing. It started in a precinct at that time when I arrived. It was in the '60s and '70s numbers of murders a year, and then by the time I would eventually leave the 7-5, it was 80 to 100 murders a year in that small precinct. And if you know anything about shootings, usually 1 in 8 or 1 to 10 shootings ends up in a homicide, because that's how good these medics are today. And people survive shooting quite frequently. So if you got 100 dead, you had 800 shootings, maybe 1,000, right? So you think of how there's only 365 days in a year, and oftentimes Sundays was a day of rest. So the reality is there's 2 to 3 shootings a day, sometimes on one shift. Sometimes you happen to go from one shooting to the next shooting. Never mind arrest, processing, and so yeah, it was a hectic but exciting. So guys would talk about. I talked to a guy yesterday. We didn't really want to miss a day of work because there was so much shit going on. It was exciting, but the reality was you needed your time off, and of course, it was sacred. But you knew you were going to miss something pretty exciting, quote unquote, in the police world, although it could be deadly and dangerous to someone else.
How did what you were doing ultimately escalate all throughout your drug activity and then closer to your indictment?
So, excuse me, like any how would I say this? Like any human being, there's ebbs in their life and how their life works. There's ups and downs, there's ebbs and flows. The things they crisscross with one another. So life is good, money's good. Life is bad, money's bad. Sometimes life is good and money's bad. So there's this whole mixture of human characteristics, personality, finances, lifestyle, and many of those times I had throughout as it would progress for me. I start out with one home, which was legitimate. I'd buy the next home, which was legitimate. I refinanced the home. I was married. I was having a child. At the same time that was going on, I began to taste the life of what's called corruption and the greed and the money that could be made. I then ended up making a nice score. I ended up buying a condominium in Myrtle Beach, Florida. Now I took it. It was a down payment. I didn't buy it outright cash, so it was sort of an investment in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, in 1985. 3 weeks later, Hurricane Hugo hit the coast of Carolina and took my building out of operation. But it was so knows that's I'm dating it and showing you what was going on back then. And so there was good and bad. So your life has an ebb and a flow, an up and a down, a yin and a yang. So it's like a snowball effect, though. The corruption, as it continues, it doesn't matter if you did one thing corrupt and stopped and then began to do a thing or two corrupt later on. It's still a conglomeration of acts of corruption. So the snowball keeps rolling, whether you're adding to it more or less. And by the time I progress to where I am using coke, so I'm going from a guy who had a couple of beers to a guy who had vodka and cocaine to a guy who is now at work snorting cocaine and drinking and living the life of a minor kingpin drug dealer as a police officer, adding homes, cars, real estate, all the fancy shit that every young quote unquote whippersnapper would add to eventually the brand new cars, the vets, the just jewelry that was unnecessary. So I look at me back then now and I go, well, I had a sign on myself, look at me, either I need help or I want attention or both. And it was a picture of, I look back and I go, here's a train wreck coming. I look at that guy, that was me. I go, here comes a train wreck. Just give it some time. So it's really you become somebody else. You go so far. My father was a fireman. He raised his 7 kids to be good, law-abiding kids and citizens. And I'm an accounting major in college. And here I am, as I get towards the pinnacle of my destruction, snorting cocaine, having extramarital affairs, not coming home, thinking I'm God. Like, who's going to stop me? If the police can't stop me, I am the police. I'm God. And you get so full of the power of being able to walk into a place and you smell like the man. And even, I'm not a big imposing guy. I'm only 6'1", 200 pounds. But when you walk in a place and you have that cocksure, people just like they recognize you immediately as somebody that has to be either dealt with or treated properly. And it's just a power that's intoxicating. So now you have power, money, and perceived success. And no one can. My mother wants to know, hey, what's going on, son? Like people are asking you questions, and you're like, nothing. Everything's good. I hit it good in Atlantic City. Atlantic City, I did really good. My taxes came in. These are the things that you found reasons and excuses and ways to tell people in order to mitigate the fact that what you were actually doing. People were calling my father and saying, listen, tell your son we're looking at him. And this is for real. Like this, my father came to me one day. He says, is everything going okay? You doing everything right? I go, why would you ask me that? Well, your cousin, who works in Suffolk County, mentioned something to me. Now, you think I take that as a warning? Right? You think, here's a cousin of the family who's not really close with me. He's a cousin. And he's my father's cousin, so he's not my cousin. So it's really not close in that respect. He's sending a message to my father. Is everything all right? These are things that a guy, when he's in the throes of destruction like I was, in the mass of hysteria, that you can't see the leaves in front of your face. You see something else. You're like God. You're watching the whole world instead of looking right in front of you. This is how bad it gets. I was out there being told by them. I actually had them, and you might have heard in the stories, that were outside my house, and I'm going, nah, they're outside my house. Nah, eventually, as the story goes, my partner, who was retired, see, a lot of people don't know the story. My partner, Ken Eurell, I don't know if you want to get to that. Eventually, he puts on a wire while we're out on bail from a state case, and I'm still looking at, like, so here's how disillusioned you are. I'm sitting next to a guy who's asking me questions that he already knows the answers to. And I'm going, you're not wearing a wire, are you? Why would you ask me questions that you know the answer to? I'm asking him that question. Oh, come on. We just need to have our stories. He had a good answer. See, I always give credit where credit's due. He had a good answer. He said to me, Mike, if we get brought in or we ever get questioned, we need to know, be on the same page so that we answer things the right way in case we have to answer to anything. All right, it's a good answer. But what I don't know is he's already answering questions, right? Which, of course, becomes the whole case. But yeah, so that's where it led me, where I was so blind to the things around me, yet recognize them, right? So I'm recognizing these, this isn't looking good. And you think as a police officer, who's a pretty sharp guy overall, you think I would have said, this isn't right. And while I'm saying it's not right, I'm still doing it. Yeah.
Was it a consequence of you just taking it too far? In other words, could you have been a corrupt cop within limits as long as you didn't kind of keep going in the way that you mentioned?
So, okay, so there's a point where I could have stopped and just did my career, so here's what happened. I was known to have a little bit of corrupt activity. So they moved me, they changed me. I go away to a rehab. I come back, but I couldn't stay away from it. You understand? So I was given the opportunities, quote unquote, not intentionally, because believe you me, they would have fired me if they could get me.
Now, you weren't ever afraid, it seems like, of getting caught, at least in those stages. Was that because the credibility of the folks who would complain of you, right, were drug dealers and other people of whom you weren't afraid? You were a cop, right? You were acting behind the badge, so you had that kind of air of invincibility about you.
So yes, so two things with that. Yes, a drug dealer making a complaint back then against a police officer. So it was a regular. So here was the problem. It was known that if you make a complaint against a police officer, they will either throw out your case or look at your case in a diminished way. And because they didn't want to have to focus on the allegation that you were making against the cop, because the cop, we have no reason to believe that this police officer, he just locked you up for $50,000 in coke, $10,000 in cash, sports car, whatever, whatever the trappings were. The officer's doing his job. He's taking care of business. And because you're a drug dealer, you're going to make a complaint. At least that's how it was. If you were legitimately doing the job correctly, you were getting a complaint from a drug dealer. That was the way their lawyers approached the whole case. And it was known. So at some point, if one cop did wrong, then they assumed every cop did wrong. I mean, like, oh my God, this guy wasn't lying. They found out, right? Maybe they did a little deeper investigation. They saw the guy lived in 4 homes. He had a condo on the ocean. Just give you an example. He had Myrtle Beach, whatever. He had a brand new Mercedes outside the precinct, whatever. If someone did an investigation deep dive and found out that this guy might not be lying, this drug dealer, so then they can go deeper and deeper. So eventually, at some point, every drug arrest was followed with an investigation by Internal Affairs. And that totally upset all the police officers that were doing the job. They were doing it correctly. But every drug arrest ended up in an investigation. If that allegation gets made that this behavior is inappropriate and unethical and all this other shit, and you're going to work doing your job, you're like, here I am doing my job, and I'm being accused of this kind. So it becomes like a mantra. Screw you, F you, we ain't going with it. So here I am getting accused of robbing drug dealers, and I'm not. But you feel the same weight. You get investigated, you're losing your assignment. You may even get put on light duty or limited duty. They put you in the station house behind the desk. You can't go out in the street. You didn't come here to do this. You came out there to be a police officer. So the whole system begins to grind itself down against you as the active police officer. And people get discouraged. And when people get discouraged, sometimes what they call act out, right? Even though it may be a one act out, it's done. Once you do that, you're corrupt, right? Right? the 1 kilo that you didn't vouch because you were pissed, or the 1 stack of money that you didn't vouch because you got accused of stealing money and you never did it. Well, now I'm taking it, and accuse me anyway, and see who wins this. You know what I mean? It becomes that way. Now, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not justifying the action, but you might be able to understand how that develops.
How much did your partner's cooperation shock you, upset you, hurt you?
Yeah. Right. That was it was devastating. It was devastating, to say the least. We alluded a little bit to it before. I'll give you an example. When they're asking me, people close to me and close to him that knew him and me as a relationship, they were like, "Did you check him for a wire?" Well, I couldn't do that, because I'd be going against who I am and who I thought we were. It's like, your brother walks in the house and he had a rough day. You give him a hug. You don't say, "Hey, are you wearing a wire?" Because you trust and love your brother. He was as close to me, if not closer, than my blood brothers. And even in one of his comments to me, he said, "Mike, you mean more to me than anyone in my family. Why would I do that to you?" I mean, could you imagine using that term? You mean more than anyone to me than anyone in my family. Why would I? And I asked him, "Are you wearing a wire?" He says, "Mike, you mean more to me than anyone in my family. Why would I do that to you?" So the hurt that I had, first there was fear when I actually recognized this. And I went to his lawyer's office. There's a whole scene that people have no clue took place. We went out to do this quote unquote kidnapping, which was not supposed to be. He kept moving the ball. You're supposed to go to the house, take the money, and leave, and the drugs. And it was, first of all, it was a sting operation from the beginning. He didn't even know it was a sting operation. It took me years in prison to figure out the whole thing. I figured the whole thing out, and what happened, because they had a guy at my house that was the Colombian who needed the money because the woman owed him money. The Colombian actually followed me on an airplane 4 years earlier to the Dominican Republic. I remembered it as I was sitting in my cell one day. Anyway, so when he turns, so wait, are we at the where he turns on me? I'm getting a little old here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, where he turns on me, I'm being told by people, is he not? Is he not? I'm going, no way. But when I finally realize it's him, I confront him at his lawyer's office. And they put me in. His lawyer says, "Come on, sit down. Let's go over this." And his lawyer hits a record button in his lawyer's office. And he starts recording the conversation between me and Kenny and him. "What'd you guys do today? Are you concerned?" I said, "Listen, I went for a ride to Queens. And during the ride, I suspected a bunch of shit, so I turned around." So the lawyer says, "But really, you went there to do a kidnapping, Mike." This is the lawyer, his lawyer. I go, "That's not what I went there for. I went there to look at a house." And I turned around and left. And Kenny's like, "Yeah, well, Mike, we were supposed to do this." I said, "Kenny, why are you talking like this?" In his lawyer's office. I'm going, this motherfucker, he's giving me up to his lawyer on tape. I know he's taping it. I saw him hit a button under his counter. I know he's taping it. The lawyer's putting the glue together, right? And I said, "Well, I'll talk to you later." I said, "I got to go." I went home, and when I arrived back home, the feds pulled up to my door. And it was quite the scene, to say the least. But you can see how almost to the last minute, as I was leaving Queens to head back home prior to that little scenario I showed you, I looked at him. I said, "Someone set us up." I said, "Who knew we were going to be here?" The two people, you, me, and Danny. And Danny wasn't there. But Danny texted us and said, "I'm running late." Maybe he had part of it to do with it also. So when we're leaving, he goes, "It had to be Danny, Mike." He says, "They didn't even show up." Meanwhile, he has the whole thing recorded. So he was steering this whole thing for them. So as it turned out, my wife says to me, as I walk back in the house the second time, my wife says to me, last night, his wife, Dory, said to me, if I never see you again, remember, I love you and Mike. This is what She tells my wife this the night before. The next day we get in the car to go do this quote unquote flower delivery. And when I get back from that, my wife said, I said, why didn't you tell me that last night? I didn't think it was important. Oh, really? The feds are knocking on the door. I'm like, oh, fuck, this ain't good. So sure. So it was like, it was total, like, your shoulders just slump down and go, I'm fucked. I'm done.
As a cop, what was it like going through the court process, prison, testifying before the commission?
So being arrested is very humiliating, to say the least. I mean, and that's an understatement. There's fear, there's humiliation, there's embarrassment for your family, and for the cops too. Here's one of the things I never really spoke about, and the first time you'll hear it here. I was embarrassed for the cops that were arresting me. Like, I looked at them and I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Does that make sense? I mean, I like, the guy's arresting me and he's not happy because he's got to arrest the cop. And I'm trying to apologize to him through my own visual, defeat. I can't say, I mean, I could even say, hey, look, I'm sorry. I can't remember if I did say that. I wouldn't doubt it because that's who I am. It can't be easy for you guys to be doing this because you got your processing. But you know what? One of the things that can get a guy who has a repenting heart, when you hear, well, you're not one of us, you know what I mean? Like, they'll say that, and they'll say that to you. You were never one of us. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that can be, like, here I am. I thought I was. But the reality was, in many ways, they're right. Now, I did sacrifice my life at times, no question about it, daily basis, but I had a different reason behind it eventually, right? I was going there to capitalize rather than to serve. And that's the sad thing, because I took the job to serve. Of course, part of taking the job to serve, I was looking to be good to myself as a human being and not be abused. So that's where it goes from being serving and not being abused to taking some abuse and then doubling down on the abuse the other way. I never said that before either. So that's sort of, I'm getting older and starting to get a little melancholy and recognizing the ways of the world or human nature.
I don't know if you're a regret kind of guy. Some people are. Some people look back at life and say, look, I made certain mistakes and they are what they are and life goes on. To the extent that you are, if you are, do you have any as it relates to your professional life, your personal life, impact on your family, your kids, things of that nature?
Right. So I don't think that anybody who's gone through the public humiliation that I have would say they have no regrets, okay? So there's a lot of ways of looking at this question. My regrets are that I didn't get the opportunity to raise my children. And so that's the first thing I would say that sticks out at me. Like, I don't sit here telling you I regret the fact that I wasted the 12 and a half years plus the 5 years probation plus all the other shit. I'm not sitting here saying I regret that happened. I regret that I lost those years, but I do. But I don't sit in it for some reason. I don't know why. I'm not built that way. I don't say, damn, I regret. What I regret is the damage I did to the police officers at the time. And some of it has been continuing and ongoing in some respects, because I still refer to my case in many ways throughout the city. In fact, I went to one police plaza to help a cop, and I'm on the front page of the Daily News, right? Anyway, so these are the things that still happen to me, which is unfortunate, because I think in many ways, while I hurt the police at the time, in some respects, part of my, we'll call it retribution, redemption, part of my redemption is that I tried to be a better human being and along the way help the police in some manner. I mean, don't forget, when I spoke before the Marlin Commission in 1993, and I started working for them in middle 92 in prison, I began my life of redemption then, right? Because I was accepting responsibility and wanting to head on a road of redemption and restart my life at some point, not knowing what kind of sentence I was going to get. So when I began that process, I felt that all the regrets I have, let me try to pay back the city, pay back the people, not financially, but with my heart and soul, and live a good life and be a good human. And listen, I fall short every day. I'm not perfect. You'll find people that say you did this wrong, you did that wrong. Yeah, but I'm an evolving human being. I've made mistakes. I made one today already. So, I'm saying so. You're constantly making mistakes, but the reality is, I'm trying to live a life of redemption. I've spoken to police organizations. I've spoken to individual cops that were going to kill themselves. So I'm happy about that. My regrets are, I'm going to take a step back from the human being I am right now and say, sometimes I regret that I didn't do worse things. I don't mean murder, but I had hundreds of thousands of dollars in my hands that I gave back. So I say I paid the ultimate price, and I didn't do what I could have done. So there's the evil part of regret, right? Where, I was a bad guy. The things I did were bad. They were inappropriate. They were criminal. But could you imagine the criminal I really could have been? Those are the things that go through someone's mind. 51%, 49%. I say, you know what? If I had to pay the price, instead of turning that $200,000 and 10 kilos back to Diaz, I should have took it. So because I paid the price for it all anyway later on. So there's those types of mindsets that go through me. But I know in the end, no matter what that regret is, that's just material and financial gain that I didn't get. I'm a humble guy. I like nice things. There's no question. I think most of us would say we do, but I don't need nice things. So I've recognized by sitting in a cell for 12 and a half years that you really don't need that much in life. You need peace. The one thing I want most in my life today is peace. So,
what impact do you think your case had on the department and the way it operates, as well as the way society perceives police?
So that's a double-edged sword, because I've had police officers complain to me, you ruined the job. Okay, so am I the only one? How many cops were arrested before me and after me? I think, and if you're in the criminal justice teaching, you'd probably say hundreds, if not thousands. Am I correct?
Possibly.
Okay. Well, I know there's been thousands. Okay, so that I know for a fact. Now, the point is, so did I make changes in the police department? Absolutely. They actually changed it from Internal Affairs Division to Internal Affairs Bureau, which means they added a whole other hierarchy in the NYPD because of my case. I also made cops, regular good guys. I hope that I gave them an opportunity to come forward safely if their partner was doing things the way I had been. And I think that might be something that actually was an outgrowth of my case. And you may know that better, because I haven't been in their teachings. I've been speaking to them, but I don't get the memo on what they now have, because they've adopted many things that I told them. They changed many of their systems that I told them to change, but I don't have the memo, but I believe I helped change policing for the better. Some guys might be pissed because they had to change their act. Sorry. But so for that, I believe I helped change policing in that respect. What else was the other part of your question?
The impact that society has on police.
Yeah, so that's an unfortunate thing. I believe when society can look at an individual cop, in my case, and then try to paint all the other police officers in the same light that they would look at me after I've been exposed for my corruption. So I think that's an unfortunate burden that I have helped, not solely. I mean, there's guys that were arrested for murder, the Ippolitos and Carazucci, whatever the heck his name, Caracappa, whatever his name is. I mean, these guys have been arrested for murder. So I'm not them. But what happened was, for some reason, my name comes out before theirs, when it comes to police corruption. And I don't know why. I didn't do hits for gas pipe, but it was such a scandal around my case. And I don't forget, at the time, the city was trying to determine whether Dinkins was going to stay in office or Giuliani was going to take over. And so there was a lot of political friction based around my case. the out.
You kind of mentioned it earlier. Do you view, there's a whole debate about whether or not corruption in policing is uh, consistent with the few bad apples theory, or is it kind of an inherent systemic issue? What do you think? You think it's just a few bad apples, or do you think there's some kind of aura within that kind of structure that leads folks down this road?
You know, I'd have to say that there's individuals, and everybody doesn't fit in a system, and everybody makes decisions, and oftentimes it's just on the edge of the systems and what they want, what they expect, and at some point you're going to get a certain element of individuals who are tired of being told what to do when what they know is either right or wrong, but it doesn't make sense. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense to take the stairs when the elevator will get you there because it's quicker, right? So it doesn't make sense to make these arrests because they're out in the street before you. So when things don't make sense, we inherently begin to change our patterns, even if it's not what's appropriate. I don't care because that's human nature. So human nature is going to be involved in everything. And if you told me that if there were 100 people in a room, 10 are going to be looking to skirt the system, no matter what system, whether it's Wall Street, whether it's the medical profession. If you told me 10 of 100 are going to, I'd probably tell you you're spot on or more. So that's just, I think it's human nature to find a system, and then people get up in the system, not intending to, but eventually they become. Because I don't think, 99.99 cops go to the job to make difference and or just have a lovely career, right? Same thing with medical professionals and teachers and lawyers and doctors and sanitation guys, But in the end, something happens. Our nature, our benign, our friendly nature becomes tarnished, and we begin to look to take advantage. I'm going to tell you, it's more than 10%.
If you could go back in time, at the moment that you got a sniff of this stuff at the first instance, would you have done anything differently?
That's a funny question. I've done anything differently. So here's how I look at this overall. You have to go through what you have to go through, right? If I don't go, if I'm not that guy sitting in front of the Marlin Commission, the world is a different place. If I made a left instead of a right, I've affected the world differently. Answering this phone call to you, I've prevented 2 or 3 other calls that came in. Something might happen to this guy, might get in his car now and then go to the lottery and put the right number in and win $890 million because I didn't take his call. So I think everything is cause and effect in one way or the other.
Mike, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your stories. You're a terrific storyteller. I'm sure there's going to be a movie about you at some point. Who will play you?
Right now, it's scheduled to be Austin Butler.
Okay, well, that's the guy.
Let's see if they get it done.
As the one that was Elvis.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, they're being generous to you, Mike.
Well,
being generous.
I was pretty at one time.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.